Bill Gates said, "I will always choose a lazy person to do a difficult job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it." What's a real-life example of this? I was working as a stock boy in a supermarket, and when we had to fill the milk cooler, people would bust open a 12-pack of milk cartons and put them in one by one. On my first day, I just placed the 12-pack in the cooler and cut the plastic off on one side with my box cutter and yanked it from under it. And the look of the store manager and the other employee who was training me was pure bewilderment. From that day, everyone did it my way. Worked as a laborer at a nursery one summer. Daily tasks included manually watering 15,000 plants each day. Put together a back-of-the-napkin plan to build an irrigation system and spent the next few weeks building it with some money from the boss. That system is still running 15 years later and does all the work now. I did automate myself out of the job and had to find another eventually. Couple years later, got my engineering degree. I'm convinced engineers are inherently lazy people that will spend a disproportionate effort to make things easier. We had to hold a thermometer in water in chemistry class. It probably was only a 20-minute experiment, but your arms get tired after a couple minutes, and you can't let the thermometer touch the bottom of the pan or it won't get an accurate reading. So instead of sucking it up and just holding the thermometer, my lab partner built a contraption out of lab books and paper clips to somehow hold the thermometer in the water without it touching bottom. It was the stupidest looking thing you would ever see in a lab class, and our professor even walked over and said, "If it looks stupid, sounds stupid, but it works, then it isn't stupid." My lab partner and I joke that he wasn't talking about the contraption, but the intellect of my lab partner. I was a paid intern at a large company during one summer back home from college. My work 95% consisted of using SAP, import to Excel, clean data and generate reports, occasionally create some tool someone needed. In the first 2 weeks after getting a hang of my responsibilities, writing all the Excel formulas needed, and basically automating 99% of my work, I was chilling. I went from actually working from 9 to 5 to maybe 1 hour tops a day. Finding, importing, cleaning, and reporting usually took hours, but with all the formulas, it took 2 minutes of clicking. I then helped the other cool intern get his stuff set up so we could both just chill. We could take 2-hour lunches, paid for by the company, and nobody said anything because we were just getting so much more done than the other interns. Of course, I helped for special tasks when asked, but those were simple 20-minute tasks building something in Excel. When I was in college, I had a job at an Italian fast food place with a reputation for its breadsticks. They came in frozen and needed a bit to thaw, so we'd take a giant 3x4-foot aluminum baking sheet, spread them out in a single layer with no spaces, and cover it with a plastic bag. Then leave it sit in the walk-in overnight. The next day, you'd have to get a pair of tongs and move each stick to a new tray, turning them over, then cover the new tray with the bag and let them sit on racks for a couple of hours before brushing on the garlic butter sauce. This was tedious enough that you'd usually be ready to brush the butter on the first tray as soon as you turned the last tray. I was given this task for the first time one morning and just did not want to deal with it. I realized if I put the second tray upside down on top of the first one, then turned it over and took the first tray out, I got exactly the same results. Blew the boss's mind when I did the 3-hour job in about 15 minutes. I was given a 0.05 per hour raise. An older company had a person dedicated to data entry, which boiled down to copying and pasting portions of data from text files into spreadsheet and formatting into a report. The person originally doing this job spent a full 40+ hours a week doing it, but was not very computer literate. When they retired, the company hired someone with actual skills. The new hire convinced management to let her work remotely after getting up to speed on the job. The first week at home was spent automating the entire job. The remainder of their multi-year tenure with the company was spent doing whatever they wanted, save the 10 to 15 minutes weekly to run their program and to answer the odd email here and there, all while getting paid full salary and benefits. They actually had to add in a few errors now and then to make it seem realistic. I had a manager in my 20s who detested the fact I turned a 2-hour process into a 15-minute process. It exposed how much lazier he was compared to me, because when the higher-ups learned from other people at my level that I created the program, they took me aside and told me he took credit for it. They asked me how I felt about that. I told them what decisions they make regarding the manager's character is their decision. Just put yourselves in my shoes and consider it from that angle. They did nothing, and I took the concept to a competitor who invested the money into making the program more robust and proprietary. My name was line 1 on the patent and trademark documents, and I did well enough to semi-retire at 45. I credit Lee Iacocca for the inspiration. He went through a similar problem with higher-ups at Ford, and his answer was to take his brain to Chrysler, who would value it. My ex-boss gave me an Excel sheet, 124,000 rows Excel sheet. Had all the company customer data per row, twice. In some of those duplicates, there was an error. She needed me to go over the list, one row by row, to check for mistakes and mark all the faulty entries I could find. Through 124,000 rows, she wanted me to do that using the arrow down key and my mouse. I thanked her. I sat down, invested half an hour into Google, copy-pasted some parts of this formula, then some parts of that. Finally, I had figured out the formula. I double-clicked the tiny rectangle so that the formula gets applied on all rows. Worked like a charm. I stood up, got myself a coffee, talked to some colleagues. Then I went to my boss. She had anticipated that I would need 3 days for this task. When I was back less than an hour later, she thought I hadn't understood the task. Or maybe a follow-up question. I will never forget the expression on her face when I told her I was done. There were 6 faulty entries. Before it was shut down entirely, I was able to privately tour the coal power plant in southeastern Virginia. At one point in the tour, the guide told me to watch out for a cord on the floor. The cord ran to a small window air conditioning unit that was duct taped to a vent. Supposedly, one day the plant began to overheat, and the plant would have to be shut down in order to repair the malfunction. There are emergency reserves for situations like this. But the plant was overheating faster than they could switch it over. Someone at the plant had just purchased the AC unit and had it in the back of their vehicle. They ran and grabbed it, plugged it in, and pointed it into one of the vents. The amount of cool air it produced was enough to not only offset the overheating, but to also re-regulate the system. So instead of repairing the issue, they just fixed the AC in place and let it run continuously until the day the plant shut down. In 1927, my grandfather started his new job at DuPont on a Friday. His first assignment was to separate out a chemical that was suspended in another chemical. He was handed a beaker of the stuff to work on. Since it was late on a Friday afternoon, he did nothing with it, just stuck it on a shelf and went home. He came back Monday morning to discover that the chemical had precipitated out and was sitting on the bottom of the beaker. He showed this to his new boss, who decided my grandfather was a genius. This process, doing nothing to the suspension, became the first of my grandfather's 47 patents.